As most of you know, I've moderated, how many have we done of these now? This is the 17th, Forever Young, and it's really been an incredible ride. I came up with this idea when I assumed the presidency about 6 years ago of THIPA, and I just committed myself to say, we are going to emphasize the seniors in THIPA. We have, as you know, we have about 45,000 commercial, which are not seniors. We have the commercial patients. And of course, we hit the magic number of 5,000 seniors, which is really a critical juncture. We estimate that there's about 30 or 40,000 seniors still left in the peninsula, the Bay cities, Torrance, Lomita, and we hope little by little to have more and more seniors join. Since that's the case, we've come up with a senior advisory board, which is headed by Jim Slay, which he'll speak about in a few minutes. You'll get a good feel for what we're trying to do. THIPA, as an overview, was started by about 5 or 6 of us in the early 1980s when I was chief of staff of the medical center. And at first we had, I think, 6 patients, and none of the doctors wanted to get involved in that dreaded HMO taint. No one wanted to be tainted with the HMO. But over the years, people have seen that if you're going to get some type of coordinated care, which is the best type of care, you must be in some type of Medicare Advantage program. And that's why we've formed THIPA. That's why it's grown so dramatically. We have about 150 primary care doctors, and as you know, you have to pick a primary care doctor when you join THIPA. And then we have twice as many specialists. When it first started out, as a matter of fact, it was a very specialist-oriented organization. But I instituted about 5 years ago direct patient referral, which means that you can go to virtually every specialist if you're in THIPA without a referral. This eliminates that gatekeeper concept that used to be so noxious to our patients. We encourage patients to see specialists versus we trying to discourage through extra co-pays and trying to make an appointment with your primary doctor. And then, as you know, a couple of months ago, we opened up our urgent care center, which is right next to the bowling alley on Hawthorne and Sepulveda. We specialize in thumb injuries. Come on. The bowling alley is very happy that we're there. So today we have a very eclectic program. I put myself last just so I can be short or long, depending on how much time we have left. On the board you could see, I don't know if it's coming out today or tomorrow, but it's coming out very, very soon. THIPA was voted the South Bay's favorite medical group. So we have really come a long way. Thank you. And since I'm the president, this is a picture of our group up here. That's our group. I see a lot of Dr. Piken's patients and Dr. Cohn's patients. And again, I mentioned self-referral to specialists. All you have to do is call, for instance, a screening colonoscopy. You don't have to go to your primary care doctor. You just call my office and you schedule it. And then we have different teams that take care of our patients. We're doing very innovative things. We have meetings with pharmacists to get your medications clear. We have meetings with a psychiatrist talk about depression and the problems that we all face as we become elderly. And I'm almost 70, so I'm in there too. And this is the picture of our advisory board. And you recognize Rini. She's always serving you unhealthy things at Costco. I'm sure you've seen her. So I'm excited about today's program. It's very eclectic. I've never heard Dr. Kahana speak. I've met him recently, and he's going to be sharing some space in our office as he gets started. He's a very unique physician in that he's a pediatrician, but also is boarded in adult nutrition. And so it's a very interesting combination of interests that he has, and I'm sure he'll tell you all about it. So first off, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Helen Dennis, who I just met. And Helen is really an aging specialist when it comes to employment and retirement. She's written a bestseller, and I'm sure you've all read her column in the Daily Breeze. She is a renowned specialist herself in the field of aging. And as I've put on these lectures, I've taken and found more non-physicians to speak to us. So I think for the future, maybe we'll split it in half and have non-physicians and physicians. So I take it everybody here is in THIPA. Who's not in THIPA? Or is everybody? Handful. No, not yet. We'll get you. So we're going to get the program started with Helen Dennis, and we're quite happy to have her.
Hello, everyone. Did you enjoy your lunch? Yes. Terrific. Terrific. I have a question for you. Has anyone who's here today attended the RSVP luncheon? Okay. I'm going to make an apology to you two individuals. I rarely give the same talk twice. However, this topic seems to have broad interest because it talks about a good old age. Raise your hand if you'd like to have a good old age. Yeah, okay. So regardless of your life stage, okay, a good old age is a topic that seems to resonate with everyone, let's say 50 on up. I have another question to ask. Did everyone get a little block? We got a block, so we're good. Okay, the topic I'm going to talk about today, first of all, can everyone hear me? Indeed, okay. I'm going to talk about 8 building blocks for a good old age. And I'd like to cover 3 areas with you. First, very briefly, a few statistics. Then to talk about exactly what do we mean when we say a good old age. And third, exactly what are those building blocks. So let's begin with life expectancy. We know in 1900, at birth, life expectancy was 47. And we know within 100 years, we've gained actually 30 years of life expectancy. And if we look at the population 65 and over, and I know I have a great little gadget here. Here it is. If we look at 2010, we know about 13% of the population is 65 and over, which means if you walk down the street, an average street on an average day, 1 out of 8 people you'll meet will be 65 or older. And we look at 2030, that percentage is going to go up to 20%. Now think about it. 1 out of 5 people in America will be 65 and over. It's called the bonus years, a longevity revolution, an aging tsunami, but we are turning into an older nation. And then let's take a look at those who are 85 plus. 2010, and this is 2010, it's 2%, and it grows up to 3, 4, and eventually 5%. So we are an aging nation, there's no question about it. But then the question is, what do we really mean by a good old age? So I was interested in the word good, and I looked it up in the dictionary and wanted to know what other words are associated with good. Well, the dictionary talked about good meat, and that was meat that had less fat. It talked about good land, and that was a land that was bountiful. It talked about good looks, which meant you were attractive. It also talked about good money, which was money that kept its value. It talked about good risks and referred to commercial property. Good promises were promises you keep. Good doctors were competent and skilled. And if you were good in terms of religion and politics, you were loyal. There was nothing there about a good old age. Some people think that's an oxymoron. Not true. It's in my face. Okay, here we go. So let's talk about old age for a moment. Bernice Newgarden was a sociologist, died a number of years ago, and she helped define what we mean by old age in terms of years. Bernice Newgarden said, well, the young old are 55 to 65, and the old are 85 plus. Or we could listen to Bernard Baruch, who said, to me, old age is always 15 years older than I am. So let's talk about what a good old age is. Does it mean that you have to be healthy? Well, let's look at Stephen Hawking, the renowned British physicist. He is in his 60s. He has had ALS since he's in his 20s. Mother Teresa had a very severe heart condition, and she served the poor in Calcutta until her mid-80s. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, with polio, led us through World War II and the Great Depression. So maybe a good old age doesn't really mean you have to be healthy. Well, maybe a good old age means that you have to age successfully. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, this diagram refers to a study that was done about 10 years ago by John Rowe and Robert Kahn with a $10 million grant from the MacArthur Foundation. And what's interesting about this study is, well, let me backtrack. A lot of the research in aging talks about the declines, trying to understand why cells die, why we decline in later life. Rowe and Kahn came along and said, no, we don't want to look at that. What we want to know is, what do we learn from people who do this well? So they followed 1,000 successful agers and said, what do they have in common? And they found 3 characteristics. One is they avoided disease and disability. Well, that's nice. You go through life and say, today I'm going to avoid disease, and that's not going to work. What they were really talking about is avoiding the risk factors that go with disease and disability. So what's a risk factor? Smoking. Give me another risk factor. Excessive drinking. What else? Overeating. What else? Stress. You know the risk factors. Okay. They also had in common what's called high cognitive and physical functioning. What do you think they meant by that? They were active. They were physically and mentally engaged. And the third aspect they had in common was they were engaged with life. And what they meant with this was 2 things. One is they engaged with what they called productive behaviors. I've taken a little academic freedom. I think it's meaningful behaviors. And the other component is that they were engaged in reciprocal relationships where there was a give and a take. That could be caring for an aging parent. It could be volunteering. It could be working. But those were aspects of successful aging. And I want to add one more piece just to this study, because it's a question that we often ask. What's really responsible for our aging? Is it really our genes, or is it our environment? Well, the same group looked at some studies that were done in Denmark on identical and fraternal twins, and they found that when it came to physical aging, 70% was lifestyle. Think about that for a moment. 70% was lifestyle, 30% genetics. And when it came to cognitive aging, it was about half and half. So is there a message here? What's the message? Keep moving, but we'll never have control, but we have a lot of influence on how we age. Well, does aging mean that you live to be 100? How many would like to live to be 100? How many would like to live to be 100 if you were healthy? Go for it. All right. That's the key. Now, there have been a number of studies, they're called centenarian studies. One has been going on for a number of years at Harvard Medical School by Dr. Thomas Perls. That's been ongoing. Another study at University of Georgia by Leonard Poon. And if we look at some of their results, some of the characteristics of people who live to be 100, which is quite interesting. They were non-smokers, or if they did smoke, it was a short period of time. They didn't drink heavily. They were extremely flexible. They could adapt to new environments quite easily. They had a sense of humor, could see the funny, humorous side of life, and they were physically and mentally active. They challenged themselves intellectually. But there was more. They seemed to be able to avoid the big diseases, which is heart attack, cancer, and stroke. We're not sure how they did it, but they seemed to avoid the big ones. They also were considered natural stress shedders. Somehow stress just didn't get to them, didn't really affect them. They did not overeat. They gained little or no weight during adulthood. And interestingly enough, they didn't find any particular diet except they were pretty high on fruits and vegetables. They were spiritual, but not necessarily religious. They believed in something beyond themselves. And this is the one that got me. They were charismatic. Now think about that for a moment. You're 98 years old, and you want to come to another Forever Young seminar here at Torrance Memorial. You need a ride. Let's say that you're 98 years old and you want to go to the bridge group or maybe a doctor appointment, or maybe you need a little help at home, or maybe you just want company. If you're charismatic, mean you're really a nice person, you're good company, people like to be with you, you're going to have people around you. So I think there's a big lesson in this one. If you're going to be miserable in older age, you might be alone. So it pays to be a really good human being because there may be more people around you. Does that make sense to you? Okay. I think it goes without saying, what's interesting to me is that it shows up in a research study as a characteristic. Well, does a good old age mean that you have to thrive? Well, Dan Buettner, who I'm going to talk about a little later, wrote a book and did a research project to find out where the happiest people in the world lived. The top of the list was Denmark, followed by Singapore, Mexico, and actually San Luis Obispo in California, which is interesting. As an aside, it's interesting, anyone here from Denmark or travel extensively in Denmark? Know the Danes? The Danes were described as being very trusting to one another, but the way their state is set up is they have lifelong health care, it's a birthright, education is free, students are paid to go to school, doctor visits, x-ray surgeries, all covered by the state. If you happen to have difficulty getting pregnant, the state will pay for fertility treatments, and you're paid to look for work if you're unemployed. Needless to say, they have a very high tax in Denmark, but nonetheless, they were considered the happiest, most thriving of the people. So there's some lessons we can learn from the thrivers. And I just want to highlight the ones in red. You can read the rest. Thought it was interesting that the lesson from the thrivers is find a modest health with neighbors, connection, social connection, and also sidewalks to make sure you get out there walking. Also, spend 6 hours a day with your lover, your kids, and your true friends. And perhaps the last one I thought was most interesting. Make sure to call your mother. I want to talk about a town now in southern Minnesota called Albert Lea. Albert Lea was the focus of a major project. They wanted to create a vitality center in Albert Lea. And let me tell you, because this is leading to our first building block. And this is based, what they did in Albert Lea is based on something called the Blue Zones. Have you ever heard of the Blue Zones? Yes. Anybody here from Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, or Manhattan Beach? Okay, you should know a lot. You should probably know about the Blue Zones. If not, I'm going to tell you about it. What the Blue Zones project did was, Dan Buettner is a journalist and photographer for National Geographic. He had an assignment from National Geographic to find the longest lived people in the world. But there was a very special criterion. They had to verify their birth by a birth certificate. I mean, we've heard about people in far-off places living to be 142. Lots of times that's not verified. Okay, so he set on this project with gerontologists, geriatricians, anthropologists, statisticians, demographers, and they located 5 areas that were considered blue zones. And it was considered a blue zone because one of the demographers looked at a big map and said, oh, here's Sardinia, and he had a blue crayon. They were all called blue zones. There were lessons learned from the blue zones that were applied to Albert Lea, okay? And this is working up to our first building block, which is community. Let me tell you what they did. Schools, they arranged walking school buses. 3 generations would meet at the corner and walk isn't that unusual in California? They would walk the children to school, okay? Restaurant owners, and these are all stakeholders in a community. Restaurant owners changed their menus. More fruits and vegetables. They put the French fry option a little lower in the corner. They had smaller serving plates. The city council voted to fund a walking path around a huge pond in Albert Lea. Employers got into the act. They got rid of the donut holes for meetings, supplied fruit, really fresh fruits. They remodeled their cafeterias to be more pleasant, so people would stay in the cafeteria rather than going to fast food places around the area. They painted their stairwells. They would be colorful, so you'd rather take the stairs than the elevator. And the supermarkets got into the act. They labeled their foods, instead of for sale, special, longevity foods, blueberries, red peppers, dark chocolate, nuts. So this was a huge community effort. And this is the astounding piece. The astounding piece, and if anyone has been involved in research, I think you'll fully appreciate this. In 10 months, which is no time at all, this project had a profound impact on the community. Life expectancy increased 3.2 years. Think about that. Depression declined. On the average, people lost 3 pounds. Okay? The health care cost for city employees was reduced by 49%. So this is not only healthy, this is a business model. This is a good investment. So you have these major changes in a period of 10 months, which brings us to our next slide about Beach City's health district is a vitality zone. Beach City Health District competed with 75 other applicants to be deemed a vitality zone, and they won. The proposal was very strong. So this is a major, and maybe you know about it. They have bike paths, they have walking groups, and they have employers involved, again, getting all the community involved to make healthy choices easy. And there's been a big investment in it. If you see Beach Cities invested almost $2 million, and Healthways invested $3.5 million. So it's a transformative project, and I think you don't have to live in those communities necessarily to benefit from it. So community is a big one. Building block number 2 is physical activity. Now, that's not certainly not a new piece of information, but this might be a little bit different. And this deals with our chromosomes and its relationship to exercise. At the tip of each of our chromosomes, there's something called a telomere. And a shortened telomere is very much related to a shortened life of that cell. And so there were some studies done, and they observed and measured that people who were sedentary, they were couch potatoes, and also experienced stress. Well, if you're alive today, there are few people who are alive who don't have some stress in their lives. They had shorter telomeres, which is a shorter lifespan for the cell. So they concluded that physical activity is a stress reducer and may add years to our lives because it allows that telomere to be longer. So it's another reason why exercise is really important. And I'm going to go back to this. The other piece that's really interesting in this is we've always said, certainly in the field of aging, that exercise will improve your quality of life. But there hasn't been a lot of evidence that says it will enable you to live longer, or chances are that you may live longer. So this is a new piece, a relatively new piece. The third building block is mental activity. We know our brains are made up of literally billions of neurons who communicate with each other. And although not everyone agrees, there are some who say by the age of 70, as part of the normal aging process, not disease or pathology, that we lose 10% of our neurons. Okay? Well, that's kind of a disheartening news. But there is good news with it, because we can slow that normal aging process. And I think here is the best part. In addition to activity and good nutrition, researchers have found that learning anything new builds neural pathways. So the whole push for lifelong education, bridge, Sudoku, taking a different way to your activities, anything that requires new learning is really good for our brains. So let's talk about personality for a moment. You can say, well, no, personality we're born with. That's just a permanent kind of thing. Well, we know that, let's say, a positive or outgoing personality really helps us cope with stress. And again, if we go back to centenarian studies, they were found to be extroverted, they were trusting, little less neurotic than perhaps the rest of us. They saw a funny, humorous side of life, and again, they were charismatic. And then we have attitude. A positive attitude helps us cope with really critical or difficult events. There was an interesting study that was done at Yale by Becca Levy, who found that people who remembered more positive events in their life lived 7 years longer than people who tended to remember the negative things, which is interesting on the role of attitude in terms of our longevity as one of the influencers. Walter Bortz is a geriatrician at Stanford, and he wrote a book, Dare to be 100. And in his book, he listed 99 ways you can live to be 100. Well, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with him, and I said, Dr. Bortz, 99 ways, okay. If you had to identify one way, what would be the most important? And he said, the most important? Believe you can reach 100. He said, the rest will follow. And he also shared a little bit of wisdom. He said, most people think if you want to live to a ripe old age, you should choose your parents and your grandparents. Bortz says, cute answer, but wrong. He says, it's not the cards you're dealt that matter the most, but it's how you play the hand. So let's go to relationships for a moment. Friends help us live longer. Friends help us live longer. A study done at Penn State found that people who were isolated and lonely, those situations created a stress response in individuals. And that stress response affected the immune system. So isolation and loneliness not only is bad from feeling lousy, but it also very likely has an effect to compromise the immune system. So there's a biological reason to keep connected. But one more piece on relationships, and this deals with women. We know that women respond to stress differently from men, okay? And when women get together, they produce a hormone called oxytocin, and it seems to have a calming effect. This typically does not occur with men. In fact, the research shows that testosterone seems to reduce the effect, and estrogen seems to enhance it. So now let's think about how many here are mothers? We're mothers, are mothers, okay? So let's think about when we had babies, and they had pimples, or they had spots, or the throat was real bad, and you were really worried. You could have called your mother, that would have helped. But did you call some friends or get together with some friends and say, listen, I'm really worried about X? Not only is that a time for good information, but it seems when women get together, it has a calming effect. And it may be one of the reasons why women may be more communal. This is a sexist statement. I may get called on this, but women in general tend to be a little bit more communal. Makes them feel better. Let's look at building block number 7, and I know we're going to have a lecture on nutrition. And this is just one aspect. We hear a lot about, and we'll hear more, I'm sure, about good nutrition as we age. But what we don't talk about, or what we don't hear about a lot, is the whole notion of calorie restriction. And there has been research that has demonstrated that not reducing nutrition, but reducing calories does increase the lifespan for yeasts and worms, mice, rats, and others. And if we go back to the Blue Zone study, to Okinawa, those long-lived individuals have an expression called harihachibu, which means you eat until you're 80% full. So that means at Thanksgiving, if you would say, how many times, oh, I am so stuffed, that would not occur. Okay, that's not 80%. And let's go to the 8th building block, which is having a sense of purpose. A study was done by MetLife Mature Market Institute. Here we go. If that's on, it's good. We're good. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're talking about purpose. And 84% of the people who said they had purpose said they were living the good life. And there was a shift in people's purpose as they aged. They moved from pursuing money and objects to pursuing something called meaning and purpose. So that meant they spend more time with family and friends, taking care of their own health, staying connected, and doing good work. And if we go back to Okinawa again, in that Blue Zone project, there's a term called ikigai, and it's a reason to wake up in the morning. And these long-lived individuals did have this ikigai, a reason to get up in the morning. Richard Leider, who's an executive coach, he says, you know, there is such a thing as a good life. It's when you live with the people you love, in a place that's right, doing good work with a sense of purpose. So we have 8 building blocks that will increase our chances of having a good old age, having a sense of community, being physically engaged and mentally engaged and active, having a positive, a little more outgoing personality, a positive attitude, nurturing those relationships and staying connected, certainly nutrition, and having a sense of purpose. Okay? Could you argue with any of these? No, we're not going to argue. So some of this is telling you what you already know with giving you a little research behind it on why we think it's valid and important. So now I'm going to undo my entire presentation. Are you ready? There was a book recently published by Susan Jacoby, Never Say Die, The Myth and Marketing of the New Old Age. She says, you know what, folks? You've been sold a bill of goods. You were looking at aging through rose-colored glasses. And she writes, most who live beyond their mid-80s can accept a period of frailty, disability before they die. And she quotes some alarming statistics, which unfortunately is true. At 85 plus, there's a 50-50 chance of suffering from dementia at some point in your life. Among the 85 plus, there's a 50-50 chance of spending some time in a nursing home. It doesn't mean forever, but it could be a nursing home or rehab center. She says extreme old age can be, quote, nasty, brutish, and long. Well, what happened to this whole presentation? Does that undo everything? She's been criticized on a number of areas. One, that she's projecting her own fears on the public through her book, and that she really hasn't given any space to the innovations that make the longevity revolution something that's positive. Doesn't talk about technology, doesn't talk about new housing arrangements, etc. However, an extended exit from this planet is not always rosy. But that does not mean we shouldn't pay attention to creating a good old age to the extent possible. From my perspective, a good old age may mean a number of things. It might be being healthy for some. It might be successful aging. It might be living to be 100. It might mean that you thrive and you're happy with your life. It might be that you give back to the community. It's very personal. But my belief is very strongly, and I've been in the field of aging for over 30 years, but my belief is very strong that the building blocks are achievable. So each one of you has a building block, right? Well, let me see what I did here. One moment. Each one of you has, that's all right, we have some slides on the side. It's not a problem. So each one of you has show me your building block. Okay, all right. Here's my suggestion. Put it in your purse, put it in your pocket, and let it be a reminder that you can do at least one thing to increase your chances of having a wonderful and good older age. Thank you. Any questions? We're open. 2 minutes? Two minutes, sir, and I'll repeat the question. I'm going to defer this to our speaker, who's a nutritionist, among many other things. And the question was milk products. And maybe you can address that at some point. Okay? Please, Now, sleep is certainly a very important piece, and one of the things, the question is, if you have poor sleep, does that negate all these wonderful building blocks? Sleep patterns change with age, and there is a real thing of sleep disorders, but with age, our sleep patterns change, the circadian rhythms change, and there's some, we'd like to encourage good sleep habits, which is exercise. There are a number of things, having the room dark, only sleeping in the room, not having television. No, it doesn't negate, but it's something to work on. It doesn't negate it. In fact, it probably strengthens all of them. Yes? Okay, are you ready? Are you ready? Now, I have to just say, this is a very interesting question. I'll answer it. But when someone comes up to you and says, God, you don't look your age. Do you say thank you, or what did you expect me to look like? Okay. Let's see. What is the date today? The 26th? Okay. Tomorrow I'll be 71 years old. And I'm a baby, right? I'm just a baby. And how old do I feel? I don't think I ever got past 26, I have to tell you that. So no secrets here. Any other comments or questions? Okay. I hope that you'd maybe take away, or that you're convinced that maybe one new activity, one new habit, one new modest change will increase the chances of getting to have that good old age. Thank you.